Hey guys, coming to you live from my basement. This is going to be our lecture for the day, scheduled originally for Tuesday. Of course, I am out of town, and of course last Tuesday we had some issues with the snow. So anyway, we're going to play a little catch-up, but we're not going to rush through it. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what happens beyond the visual cortex, the striate cortex that we discussed a whopping week and a half ago. So just kind of follow along with me. I'll try to do my best to explain everything in enough detail so that you can process it. Just as a note, feel free to email me, ask me a question if something's not clear, and I'll be sure to clarify for you. So, okay, higher level visual processing. So, thus far we've come from this point. If you look at this brain, it's sort of looking to your left. We're coming from the retina, from the left, and it's going back to the occipital lobe where we've got the visual cortex, the striate cortex. And then from there, it's sort of, you can envision it bouncing forward up and to the side. The dorsal pathway over to the top, and the ventral pathway underneath down and to the side. Okay, so we're going to follow it back to those areas and tell you what exactly those areas serve, because vision just doesn't happen in the occipital lobe. It goes to other areas as well. So, as it says here, after V1, the visual area 1, the occipital lobe, the striate cortex, this information gets further organized and sent to different areas. Okay, namely, there are two areas I mentioned before: the parietal lobe on the dorsal up side, kind of like the dorsal fin for, say, a dolphin. It's on the top. That's probably the easiest way to remember it. And the ventral, kind of on the belly, the lower, it goes towards the temporal lobe. Those two areas serve a couple of different functions. Namely, the dorsal pathway that goes up top serves what appears to be the function of telling us where something is in our visual field, and the perception of motion and location of objects. The ventral pathway, going towards the temporal lobe, deals with perception of what something is. Object representation is a good way to put it. Specifics like faces, what or who somebody is represented here in specific areas in the temporal lobe. Okay, next slide here is a nice color representation. This is looking at the back of a brain. The red area is the primary visual cortex, the striate cortex I've called it. And then, of course, the information is pushed forward, both up and to the side, and that's the extrastriate cortex. So beyond the striate cortex is what that means. So if you see the term extrastriate, that simply means we're talking about these dorsal and ventral pathways. Okay, and that's shown in an orangish yellow color there. All right, how do we know this stuff? This is always a question, how and why. You should ask. You shouldn't just take my word for it. I know you love me, but who knows? I could be lying to you this whole time, and oh my goodness, that would be tragic. And of course I'm not. But here's how we do know. I'll prove it to you. There's evidence. Kind of a landmark study in 1982. Unger Leiter in Michigan did a study where they removed lobes, either parietal or temporal lobes, from monkeys, and they tested their function. I know it sounds evil and cruel. We learned a ton about how vision works because of this experiment. The monkeys that had their parietal lobes removed, again, this is the dorsal pathway, the where pathway, they couldn't locate food that was closer to a specific landmark, but for instance, where something would be. We take for granted that you kind of integrate all of this information, where and what, and it's seamless, in your visual world and otherwise. If you take this chunk out that signals where, then you're severely compromised in that way. Conversely, the monkeys with the temporal lobes removed, but that maintain their parietal lobes, that was still intact, they easily performed the task of finding where the food was, based on where a landmark was. In a different kind of task, these monkeys with the temporal lobes removed, they couldn't identify the proper shape of an object to move in order to receive food. In other words, the what aspect. what was the shape that I need to, manipulate or move in order to receive food. Don't know what, because of course the temporal lobe deals with that ventral pathway towards the temporal lobe, and so that seems to be specific with what or who, okay, that object representation. However, the parietal lobe missing monkeys could do that task because they had their temporal lobes intact. So hopefully that makes sense to you, and it's a pretty specific functional difference there, what versus where. Another way we know about some of this stuff, how vision, visual objects, and the entirety of vision is represented in the brain, is through what's called an agnosia, the lack of knowing something. In this case, it's visual agnosia, so you lose the lack of knowledge through vision. And so an agnosia usually is acquired through possibly damage, an accident, or a stroke, perchance, to these specific areas. Where we're talking about dorsal and ventral visual streams here. One kind of agnosia is called simultagnosia. It's fascinating. A patient with simultagnosia can't identify more than one object at a time. And so I mentioned to you I worked at an ophthalmology clinic in New Hampshire when I was in graduate school. And there was such a patient. They're very rare, I might add. It's not a lot of people walking around with simultagnosia. But she came in, and I thought I had just learned about these phenomena maybe 6 months earlier, and the doc told me about it, and that this patient had simultagnosia, and I said, wow, can I talk to her a little bit about it? And he said, sure. And she was very gracious, and I did the classic test where I held a pen and a pencil in a plus sign, basically in front of her, about 3 or 4 feet in front of her, and I said, okay, so tell me what you see. And she says, oh, well, this is a classic test. I've been tested on this before. And she says, okay, well, I'm looking at it, and, she could only see one at a time. Just the pen or the pencil, and they would either fade in or out, or maybe she'd have a preference for the horizontal or vertical at any one time. And I switched them around, and I probably pestered her a little too much, but it was fascinating. So anyway, you show a patient a picture like the one shown here on the slide, and what do they see? Well, they're only able to note one or two of the objects. Maybe it's this coffee mug or something that seems to be the outermost part of the picture. Maybe the flower, the hammer. There's something down there on the bottom there. Perhaps it's a little shovel or something. The point is they can only see one thing at a time, and isn't that strange to think that we process, of course, multiple items. We understand that when something's covering something up, that doesn't mean that part is just completely gone, disappeared. It just means it's occluded by another object. And so apparently folks with simultagnosia can't really process things that way. Fascinating. Okay, color agnosia. This is a fascinating deficiency as well. Severe impairment of the ability to identify, distinguish colors verbally. Okay, so consciously not able to perceive color, but get this, technically their color vision is intact. So you see the Ishihara plates here, the bubble color plates that most of you have probably been tested on before for just testing general color vision. I believe I've shown them to you in class. You look at this, and the upper left is 25, and then I believe you've got 6 here for the upper right, 45 lower left, and 8 lower right. These kinds of things, the patients can actually read the numbers. So their color vision is intact, but they will tell you that they cannot see color. So it's a bit of a disconnect there. So the conscious processing of color is compromised. The front end of the process works fine. So they're able to actually discriminate colors, but they don't see color. You show them a picture of that little bunch of blue bananas. Nothing wrong with that. That's bananas. Well, to you and me, we say, I don't think I'd want to eat those. They're blue. Normally, bananas are yellow. That neon green dachshund dog wouldn't strike somebody with color agnosia as being odd, out of the ordinary. Of course, that's an unusually colored dog. Although I think one of my friends may have spray painted his schnauzer one time. That's another story. I'm probably just lying to you. Sorry. Okay, visual hemi-neglect, another one that's wild. What's going on here? Well, only half of the visual field is processed, is consciously made aware to the patient. You remember we talked about how these halves of the visual fields work. It starts in the retina. Anything just to the left of center of the fovea is the left visual field, and right is right, or actually reversed optically. You understand what I'm saying. And it gets halved and crosses over at the optic chiasm, so on and so forth, gets sent back to the cortex. Well, it's somewhere along the way, and of course, here we see it's usually the result of parietal lobe damage. You remember what parietal lobe does? It's the where aspect. Okay, so sort of where something is in the visual field. It's compromised, it's damaged, and so that structure that serves the where aspect allows you to pay attention to your entire visual field that's damaged. And so therefore the functional deficit, the perceptual deficit, is that you see half of everything. You look at a clock, you may only see the right half of the clock versus the left. Male patients with this condition will often only shave half of their face. It's incredible. They completely neglect the other half, just half of their body. You might think, well, can you reverse the visual fields and maybe perhaps put an inverting prism, a mirror, reflect? And you can indeed. And then they will actually pay attention to the other half, for instance, of their face, of other objects. So, pretty wild. Very specific. Prosopagnosia, specific to faces. This is also called face blindness. And I mentioned in the temporal lobe, the what visual stream. It's also been tentatively labeled as well the who pathway, because faces are represented here. And it's, so if you damage this area, this chunk of cortex called the fusiform face area, and by the way, if the brain devotes a chunk of cortex to a specific functional aspect like the perception of faces, it's incredibly important. Okay, when the brain has a chunk devoted just for faces, of course we know faces are incredibly important. That's spending a lot of horsepower on one thing. Well, of course, most of you would say, I never forget a face, right? Well, that's because you've got this, this incredible processing power, in unison with memory to allow you to perceive faces and recall them without really any hesitation whatsoever. So you look at this picture down here, and you see this odd thing, this person, half fish, laying on the beach. Well, somebody with prosopagnosia would look at that and say, huh, that's a person laying on the beach. The fact that the top half is a fish, the head is a fish, would not make a difference to them. Faces mean nothing to these people that have this condition. It's hard to imagine. You or me with normal face perception, this is very odd, but to them, and it's hard to imagine what it's like for them. But they have there's no significance to a face. All right, this picture here, what do you think they would see here? We put it together and we see a face. I mean, it's made out of food, of course, so maybe you'd say that's an edible face. Awesome, lots of veggies, fruits, whatever. Somebody with prosopagnosia just says that's a bunch of food. There's no significance to the fact that it's in the form of a face. This is the truth. It's very interesting. Next slide here. Motion, another agnosia. Motion agnosia. You can see a stable object, one that's still, but once they move, they disappear. Pretty incredible. All right, that would be disturbing. Visual area MT, and you see in the diagram here, coming from the right to the left, we're talking about magnocellular, parvocellular. We've got ganglion cells from the retina, the LGN moving further to the left. V1 is that visual cortex, the striate cortex. V2 moving on. you see area MT going up to the right there, heading towards the parietal lobe. If you damage this area, you lose the ability to perceive motion, okay, where something is in the visual field. And of course, when something's moving, that's what it's all about, is where. Where is it? Okay, it's moving, it's changing its position constantly, right? Well, if you don't have the ability to represent where something is, you just goes away. You can't process it. Okay, so this is part of the puzzle that puts together our entire visual world. MT is crucial in serving the perception of motion. Now, I wish I were in class with you now, because I'd take you to this link down at the bottom where you can actually have a little interactive experience with this dude here, this point light walker person. The point here is that, you know, what we get a ton of information from how somebody moves. You get gender information. You know, typically males walk, you know, their hips don't move as much. Women tend to move slightly more hip-wise, shaking it back and forth, whatever. You can get heavy versus light, you know, the build of a person, and also their mood, how you move. You know, we call it body language. Well, certainly in terms of movement, you can convey a lot of information on, you know, in regard to your mood, all of this stuff. I've provided the link at the bottom, so you can click on this on your own time and check it out. And you can actually adjust the sliders there in the upper left to get a more accurate representation of sort of how a female moves. Or, you know, you can change to a female who is light, nervous, happy, whatever. You can tweak it however you like it. I'll, of course, have the PowerPoint slide, actually this presentation, posted on ELC as a separate file for you to check out. Alright, now, oh my goodness, the motion after effect. This is pretty wild. Now, we've gone through a couple of after effects in class. Color after effects, right? The tilt after effect. Did that about a week and a half ago. This is the motion after effect, and the fact that, you know, we process motion, it's wired up similarly to color, and that there are these circuits that are sort of give and take. So left versus right, up and down. And so if you stare at this, the center of this stimulus, for 15 or 20 seconds, just keep staring right at it. And then again, after about 10, 15, 20 seconds at least of staring right at it, the visual system starts to think, well, this is my norm, where normally still is norm. Well, and then you look away at your hand. Oh my goodness, I just did it, and it's freaking me out a little bit. It starts to think that, well, your hand, your stable hand, it starts to move in a weird way. It looks like it's morphing, like maybe there's an alien emerging from it or something. Anyhow, it starts to think that stable is now moving because you've exposed your visual system to this odd motion, and it starts to think that motion is normal. Next slide, same thing. You stare at the center of this for, again, about 15 or 20 seconds to get a nice effect. And, you know, this is something it's kind of fun, you know. Good grief, who needs drugs? You can stare at this stuff and get a wild effect, okay? And then after 15, just look away at your hand, or maybe if you're around another person, look at their face. Yikes. It's crazy. So those parts that are moving inward, they'll start to expand, and those that are moving outward will start to contract when you look away at something. And the effect lasts for about 5 to 10 seconds, maybe at the most. And then you can, your visual system renormalizes to what it's normally used to, which is a fairly stable, not as crazy looking visual stimulus. Next slide here. Extra striate cortex, again, that extra beyond the striate cortex, bit of a visual representation. The left set of pictures there from a monkey brain, a study was done, fMRI, not pretty pictures, not too much explanatory value there. The picture on the right, however, kind of traces things back. Many of the things we've talked about in terms of nasal retina, temporal retina, optic chiasm, LGN, superior colliculi, and then projecting from V1 on up through back to, upwards to the parietal lobe, and along the bottom side to the temporal lobe. That's sort of represented there. And I'll here in a second with this take-home information about the extrastriate areas. This little chart here, this figure you've seen just a few minutes ago, traces it pretty much how it works. And remember the idea of parallel visual pathways. So vision is a lot of information. It's, I've said it before a couple of times in class, vision, our eyes are not cameras. They process things, they keep everything separate, all aspects, form, color, motion, all of these things, brightness, it's all kept separate. Okay, remember we talked about that with regard to magno and parvocellular layers in the LGN. It's kept fairly separate in the cortex. They start to wire together to be able to produce, circuits for motion, those kinds of things. And then ultimately, as we move towards consciousness, where something is, what something is, relation to your own body. So those parallel streams are kept together. Here's the take-home information. V1 is the striate cortex. It's it's where everything from the front end, the retinas and LGN, etc., where all of that stuff ends up in the back. And then it's organized, it's projected to different areas. Okay, V2, you'll see as you follow it from the right to the left in the diagram, it's sort of a relay station. Okay, and you start to see neurons that are sensitive to input from both eyes. So if you've got something in your left visual field, for instance, it's seen, so to speak, by both retinas. Those cells that fire, they fire together, okay, to represent that thing from both the right eye and the left eye, so both eyes, binocular. Those kinds of cells are found in V2, and they're found there first. Okay, so we get stereo vision starting here in V2. V3 processes form, the shapes of things. V4 is color. This is the area that's damaged usually in color agnosias. Also attentional modulation, so how much attention do we pay to something? V4 plays a role in that. And that's a pretty big deal. We'll talk about attention later in the semester. V5, area MT, we talked about for motion perception. Also some eye movements. As you might imagine, eye movements and motion kind of go hand in hand. And so it's probably, makes sense that these functions are found in the same area. So you can actually track a moving object, for instance, with eye movements. Okay, and then area IT, you see at the bottom there, inferotemporal. This is the face area. Okay, specific objects, for instance, faces, and that specific area, the fusiform face area, is a subset of a little chunk inside of inferotemporal that allows for perception of faces. Okay, hopefully that made sense in terms of the extrastriate areas. We're going to move on this slide presentation. Perception. So now we've got an idea of how the visual system is wired up. All right, we've taken it from the front end, the retina, the optics of the eye. What is sensation, perception, and it's now getting back to the brain and to the conscious awareness stage. And so this is where we're going to start, object perception, and that's a neat quote from William James, extremely well-known psychologist. Whilst part of what we perceive comes through our senses from the object before us, another part, and it may be the larger part, always comes out of our own mind. And it's a very true statement. This is what's called a top-down process. So based on your experience, you know what to expect, and so that's a large part. And I'll prove this to you in this part of the presentation. It's here. Now look at this. Oh my goodness. This is an amazing artist. The guy there on the quote-unquote ledge, his name is Julian Beaver, and he is commissioned often by companies, Coca-Cola, Chick-fil-A, McDonald's, and you name it, they'll hire this guy all over the world to draw these amazing sidewalk chalk drawings. And indeed, this is all this is a drawing on a sidewalk that when viewed from a specific angle, it appears it conveys this amazing perception of depth. And, you know, obviously, there's no building under the ground here. Batman and Robin are not climbing up a burning building. But it's all based on cues, these cues that we have to vision, what things are, what they mean, where they are in the visual field. And so here, if these cues happen to be used to produce the visual perception of something that can't possibly exist, it doesn't matter. We must see it, because the visual cues, they tell us that Batman and Robin are scaling a burning building underneath the surface of the earth. It's crazy and wild. But this guy is really, really amazing. I've got some other slides for you to see. These are gee whiz slides. That is really not a humongous Coke bottle sitting in the middle of the sidewalk. It is a two-dimensional, just a drawing flat on the sidewalk. Okay, how does he do this? Well, he knows the visual cues that lead to the perception of three-dimensional objects. Okay, what kind of image on the sidewalk do I have to draw that, when viewed from a specific angle, and it has to be a specific angle, provide the depth cues? You know, it could be shading. You see the shiny, apparently shiny top surface. This is reflection. It's giving us the impression that the bottle has light coming off of it, right? And so really this bottle is quite long when it's drawn on the sidewalk itself. It's very fat, I should say, wide. You get back a certain number of feet and it starts to, on the retina, look like it takes on the dimensions of a Coke bottle. It's pretty fascinating. There, I'll show you a few more. This, wow, looks like there's a hole in the sidewalk there. It's just the drawing. It's just the cues. That's just a two-dimensional drawing on the sidewalk. And I'll show you what this thing looks like. One of the drawings here coming up from the opposite angle, not from the, you know, the primary angle that he wants. Look at that. It's pretty wild. There's a humongous, nasty fly. I think this was for Raid bug spray or something like that. This angle, the leg does not look, you know, terribly long. It looks like it's going up, right? Because all the cues tell us it's going up out of the pool, right? The point here, of course, is that you can give many retinal stimuli are ambiguous. The brain has to interpret this stuff, right? And depending on if you give it the right cues, it will perceive depth. It will perceive three dimensions. Here's another one. Okay, looks like he's digging down into the sidewalk. Amazing. I mean, it's just very talented. Okay, it's another cool one. Here's some drawing chalk, I guess, that he uses actually for his art. And it looks like a box sitting on the sidewalk. It's not there. All right, it's just a two-dimensional drawing. It's pretty wild. This is probably the neatest one, I think. It's kind of a self-portrait. He's drawn himself, and he's sitting next to him. And again, it's just the, you know, this guy. If you could see it from above, I wish I had pictures. Right down to the beer. He's drawn the beer there on the sidewalk. It's pretty wild. But from that specific angle, it looks like, you know, a person standing up or moving up, you know, from the sidewalk up into space, when actually it's just a flat object drawn on the sidewalk. Pretty neat. Hope you guys like these. A seal coming out of the sidewalk. You can look him up. He's got, I think by now, probably hundreds of these, and there's probably a neat pictures of other angles out. All right, getting into the object perception a little bit more in depth here from a historical standpoint. The Gestalt school, of course, is famous for the saying, "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts," and that simply refers to the meaning of a situation. The the top-down process. We've learned about how things are supposed to be organized, and so you look at this picture on the left. It is far more meaningful than this scattered bunch of objects here on the right picture. Okay, it's organized. It means something to us. Okay, and that's kind of goes without saying, and it's a little bit of a sort of, well, who cares? You know, I get it. But the fact is it's a very important point, because this is your experience that's feeding into your perception. It's not just what's out there. You take it in. You impose upon it how you think about things, what your experience is, and then the mixture of those things together produces your visual experience, your knowledge, your organization, your perceptual organization of the world, visually speaking. Figure-ground segregation. So you can look at this stimulus here in the lower left-hand part of the slide and see 4 black, sort of odd-shaped objects. But can you see the word tie in there as well? T-I-E, the blue coming through the black. Well, you can see either or. You can either see tie or the black objects. Not both. There seems to be this a segregation between the foreground and the background. And one or the other has to become the figure. The other one has to become the background, the ground. And so Gestalt psychologists notice this, and it's kind of frustrating. I'll look and I try to see both at the same time, and they flip back and forth rather quickly. That's some property of conscious visual perception. It's just we can't really get around it. Something is the figure, something is the ground, the background. Okay, the most famous, perhaps, example of this phenomenon is the face-vase illusion, where you see either the faces, the left and the right aspect of this picture, or the vase in the middle, and it will flip back and forth between the faces and the vase. You try and concentrate on one or the other. Okay, there are other aspects, other names, different kinds of definitions of these Gestalt concepts. Pragnans is one. It means good figure. Every stimulus pattern, it's seen in such a way that the resulting structure is as simple and meaningful as possible. Timely here, the Olympic symbol, and it's seen as 5 rings that are joined together. Okay, if you really break it down and look at this, you would see that there would have to be little breaks in this. You look at the yellow circle, for instance. It's broken by the black and blue rings. Okay, but we don't see it as broken. We see it as continuous, and the same is true of the other circles. There's good continuation, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. This figure here, the more meaningful aspect of it is the squares. Okay, these, even though they're not connected, these brackets, they seem to suggest squares, and so we tend to connect them as squares. Okay, you look at the figures could be the brackets back to back. Okay, could be that, but we tend to organize the most meaningful, the good figure in this particular stimulus tends to be organized into squares, these shapes. Okay, and so again, this is a higher level experiential process. Look at this one. This is pretty funny. Okay, across you've got 12, 13, and 14, right? Down you've got A, B, C. Well, how could it be B and 13 at the same time? Well, it can be. And guess what? ABC makes a lot more sense than A13C or 12B14. Okay, it's all in the context of it, and we do it automatically, and for good reason. I'm glad, actually. Other things I've shown you, Kanaza's triangle before. The mere suggestion of a triangle makes the visual system say, there's a triangle there, and here I'll even fill in some lines for you. The vertical line illusion here with the wavy line in the middle, that can be done just by merely shifting and suggesting a break. That line is actually not there per se. It's rendered to you through your conscious visual perception by your brain. Another example of that is the cat. Okay, obviously makes a lot more sense than having each of those be an A the H and the A, or each of them be an H. Okay, it wouldn't make sense. So, pretty neat. Depends on the situation, the context. The visual system fills it in for us, and it does it very quick. More examples of the law of prognance. Okay, this is a Necker cube in the middle there. Look at this in 2 dimensions if you can. Try not to see the cube itself, just see the line drawings through the black circles. It's hard not to see the cube if you look right at it. You can do it. You can do it. It's just difficult because, again, the suggestion of a cube there, you've got the vertices, all of them covered by the black circles. It tells you, hey, okay, that stimulus, like with Julian Beever's paintings, suggests something's there, and that something makes a lot of sense if it's a cube. All right, the far right picture there, you've got this square appears to float above the background. Okay, and that's, of course, just suggested by the stimulus itself. All right. Specific on the left bottom there, you make sharp edges. You've got a nice sharp triangle. You round those, rods sort of that would normally maybe from the left define the triangle. You don't get that effect. The triangle is sort of not even really there, right? And so, again, it's experience. You know that triangles have these sharp corners, and they are connected, obviously, by 3 corners, 3 vertices, and then you don't have that with the rounded edges. So it requires a pretty nice, strong suggestion. You can't just throw anything at the visual system and expect it to bite. Okay, prognons. You can, however, make a triangle curve. You can make lines bend. Okay, suggestion. Pretty wild. Down below, you see different aspects of how you can make the effect stronger, weaker, disappear altogether. Oh my. The Gestalt psychologists up through the probably 1900s really went after all sorts of aspects, and for good reason. I mean, they were discovering so much about how the visual system works just by observing perception. Proximity, nearness. If things are near each other, they seem to go together. They're grouped together. And so on the left here, we've got vertical grouping, you see, and then on the right, it's horizontal just because of the proximity. Okay, they just go together that way. Otherwise, they're the same. Okay, it's hard to see, lines in the left figure, for instance. It's hard to see them grouped horizontally. It's just almost automatically grouped vertically. Likewise with the horizontal arrangement on the right figure. Common fate, things that are moving in the same direction. I don't have a very good sort of figure for this, but things that are moving in the same direction, just similar with grouping here, they appear to belong together. Okay, like the school of fish is probably the best example of that. All right. This also holds true, for similarity. Things that are similar appear to be grouped together. So these are organized vertically in this figure, right? Because we've got these hexagons. Let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hexagons and squares. Vertical, right? Try for a second to see horizontal lines there. It's difficult. All right? Consciously, it's difficult for us because our visual system groups things. And think about how that serves us on a daily basis. It probably serves us in a number of situations. You group things together, things move together. In terms of traffic, like things move together. You might even say it could be attributed to how a person moves. A person is grouped together. That person stays together. And I know it makes physical sense. People don't just have parts flying off of them. But this is something we take for granted. And it probably has a little bit to do with this whole thing, consciously, perceptually. Good continuation. Stimuli follow the smoothest path. And we've got a square here on the lower left, even though its corners are missing. Again, that's mere suggestion. We continue the lines to form the corners. Likewise, in the lower right figure here, we've got a line that connects A to B and a line that connects C to D. All right, and we don't, however, see a line connecting C to B or A to D. It doesn't make sense. It's not the smoothest path. Another major cue that we get from the environment is light and shading. Okay, the visual system makes an assumption that light comes from above. Now, why? Well, hello, the sun's up there. All right, that the sun is the major one. Even artificial lighting we put above us, typically. All right, room lights, lights normally coming from above. So you look at these, the dimples and the divots in this figure, and, well, what would produce a dimple here? Well, the light coming from above. So you look at that little circle there, upper left, and the light striking and it's casting a shadow. So it's a bump, right? And likewise, the dimple, the next one down from it or over from it, whichever one you choose, the indentation produces a shadow, and then eventually the light hits the other side as it comes out, coming from the top. Right? So you flip this figure upside down, and it's the exact opposite. Again, just the shading provides us cues, and it gives a really compelling impression of 3 dimensions. So light comes from above. All right, and this is why, believe it or not, when you Halloween time or whatever, you shine a flashlight from below your face, so you cast light up instead of down. That looks very disturbing, all right, because we're not, first of all, faces are, as I've shown a couple of times in class already, they're incredibly important stimuli. You mess with it, you make it look a little different or weird, unusual, not natural, oh my gosh, it will, throw you for a loop. Okay, it freak you out a little bit, right? Well, this is what casting the light up does. It casts shadows. Your nose does not normally cast a shadow up. Normally it's down. You cast it up, and your face looks very strange. Okay, so you can scare a bunch of little kids that way. It's fun. I do it every year. Haha. All right, slide here. Look at this. Shape from shading. This is a rotating mask. All right, it's rotating, rotating. Whoop. Oh my, it's changed direction. Okay, Now, okay, follow this thing. It's coming back around, and it's just a 3-dimensional mask, a hollow mask, moving around. You see the face, the nose pointing out at you. Here we go. Keeping going, and whoa. It appears to reverse direction, and then all of a sudden here it goes again. Well, why is this? And this is no trickery. I'm not, messing with you here. This is because we see faces always, always, always as pointing towards us. I have yet to see a concave face. They're always convex, pointing out. So when your visual system sees a face, even though it's pointing away from you, it said that can't be. That's not even possible. Never seen one. I've seen millions and millions and millions of faces. And so it has to, the direction has to reverse in order for you to see it correctly. So try your best to keep that thing rotating right. You just can't. It flips, right? Okay, so there you go. Enjoy that. That's kind of a... next one, same thing with a Halloween mask as Charlie Chaplin. Regular old Halloween mask. Whoa, whoops. There it goes. Same kind of thing. It's a face. Your brain immediately says that face is pointing at me. For the light cues that it's receiving, it forces you to reverse the direction of the perception of that mask, the rotation. Okay? It has to, in order for that face to point at you. And that's just simply because of the light shading cue. So it works not only with the computer-generated image, but here we are with an actual Halloween mask. Crazy. All right, here's another one. This is quite nuts. That face is pointing at you, right? Uh-oh. No, it's not. Oh, you guys. I'm messing with you, and I'm loving it. So that's Albert Einstein there for you. It's compelling. Again, we just see faces pointing at us. It's fun. Again, shape from shading, special case of we can't not see a face pointing at us. It has to. All right, and if you don't see that, then I don't know, you might make an appointment with a doctor. I think you're probably mildly damaged. All right, so now, pulling back here, okay, object perception. We've talked about how, the brain is wired up in a very complex fashion to represent these, different aspects of the visual experience: color, form, motion, movement, brightness, all of this stuff. And it's put together in consciousness and organized in such a way that things appear to be normal and stable all the time, unless we get this weird conditions involved in, say, illusions. Well, can't you just make a computer mimic human vision, be able to count objects, recognize objects? It would seem to be pretty easy. I mean, we're coming a long way with computer power, and we've got a lot of horsepower. Processing speed is insane. It's growing exponentially. There's so much. You can't really ask a computer to even come close to what the brain can do. Not even now, despite the fact that my smartphone can do, has probably a more complex brain, it seems, than I do most of the time. That's a lie, believe it or not. Yeah, I know you beg to differ, but it's true. We don't have a computer that can even come close. We assume, we take for granted all of these, seemingly simple tasks. You spill 3 or 4 M&Ms onto the floor, and you count them. You spill 20 of them, you count the M&Ms on the floor, little bits of candy. We can do that. A computer would struggle mightily with that, because guess what? What if one of the M&Ms happened to be overlapping another one? Well, we go, oh yeah, well, that's just 2. There's just one sitting on the other. Does the computer know that? No, it can't. We talked about Julian Beaver's chalk drawings, and any number of stimuli on the retina is completely ambiguous. Any number of objects can create the same image on the retina. Experience really counts. Yes, you can trick the human visual system, but there are many situations where we can take context into account and therefore be able to decide for ourselves what is really happening. The computer would just be flummoxed in that situation. Objects need to be separated. I mentioned this with little M&M candies. Okay, it's difficult for a computer to tell where one object ends and another begins unless they're completely separated. Okay, there are smart algorithms that are getting around some of this, but experience, knowledge, what we call knowledge, which involves memory, obviously learning about our visual world. We've taken for granted that billions and trillions of times you've had experiences, and unintentionally have learned about the world this way, and the brain obviously knows, based on context, what something is versus what something isn't. 3, parts of objects can be hidden. It's difficult to determine the shapes of objects that are partially hidden. Okay, you can still tell that it's your best friend's face if maybe 1/3 or even half of it is covered up in a picture. There are characteristics of that person's face that you recognize, that you're just like, oh yeah, that's Joe. I can tell, even though half of his face is cut off from the picture. Okay, a computer, good luck with that. Not going to happen. Any of you ever been in an Ames room? This is what's depicted here on the right. Sometimes you'll see carnivals, fun houses, whatever. State fairs will have these sometimes, and museums will often have them. Really wild, the way these are designed. It's kind of like Julian Beaver's art, where things that are far away, you have to draw them accordingly. And so this is an actual representation on the top here of your view of the world, of this room here, through a little peephole, the viewing hole you see on the bottom there. A person can walk from one end to the other and nearly double in size. I'm not kidding. It's amazing to see it happen in person. So this is no joke. This is just simply a room that's completely distorted in its dimensions. It does not look that way from your perspective, that viewing hole, but it's been built, as you can see. One end of the ceiling is very tall, the other is very short, but the angles, the way the floor is drawn, those tiles are not equal sized tiles. They're cut in such a way as to represent it, make it look like it's the same distance from you, but it's actually much farther away, okay, or much higher or lower. Those windows have been made the same way. They've been designed to capture, to make it look like they're in the same depth plane, but one is actually farther away, much farther away than the other. Okay, all that adds up to is something's not registering properly here. The person must just be getting huge, because this room looks like a squared off room from my perspective, and it really does. It's pretty funny. So you can pretty easily trick the visual system. All right, lastly, make like a chicken here and look at that center dot and move your head back and forth. Block, 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 block. And you'll see these rings start to move. One moves counterclockwise, the other one clockwise. What we see is not reality. It's what our visual system renders to be our reality. In this case, the contrast of those little patterns that form the circles suggests to us, our retinal cells, that there is motion when we move away or towards the dot. And so the take-home message is, what we see is what our brain wants us to see, and it's based on many, many years of experience. Okay, I hope you guys have gotten something out of this. I'll post this as a PowerPoint file on ELC as well, and then be looking for the next lecture for Thursday. Of course, I'll be out of town. You guys do not have to come to class, obviously, so take the week off, but really don't. Watch this a couple times if you want, whatever, and then the next one will be coming up. I'll post it on YouTube as well for Thursday's class. All right, take it easy.